Thanks, Rick.
Thanks,
Hey,
Rick.
Patrick. Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Malcolm.
Okay, let's tell everybody what this is all about. What we're going to be doing is a series of almost chat shows where I'll be working with people that I'm friends with, and the idea is to get them to delve a little bit deeper into some of the subjects as you just heard Rick say. And today we're going to be talking about integrating business goals and IT priorities, simplifying the service strategy phase of the service lifecycle, which should be interesting. And I think it's quite an interesting third one there Patrick's chosen, which is driving down the complexity of ITIL. And these are three talking points that are very close to Patrick. What we want to do first of all is get to know Patrick a little bit, because I said this is going to be a bit more like a chat show, so I don't want to go diving straight in and say, come on Patrick, tell me your talking points. I'd like to know the person. I'm sure you'd like to know the person behind the talking points. Before we do that, Patrick, I've got this slide here that I put together this morning. I noticed that on your job title you're called an evangelist, is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Apparently it's the bringer of good news, Malcolm.
Is it? Well, let's have a look at some anagrams, shall we? Of evangelist. Salvage tin, which I think is an absolute gem. You'll be collecting for money soon, Patrick, if you keep talking evangelist. Then we have a genial vast. Actually, you're not vast, but the first bit works. You're a very happy, genial, chatty. Then we've got vegan's tail. Is that right?
Oh, no, I'm a huge carnivore.
So you are genial vast after all then?
I am genial vast, yeah.
As opposed to native's leg?
Yeah, well, I suppose there might definitely be some relevance in that.
No, I think the last one's closer to you, Patrick. As in the chasing of.
Native gals. We like that.
Yeah. But you know, at the same time, what I also remind you to do is look at what happens when we do it to Patrick Bolger.
Oh, this could be interesting. Like big reports. I quite like that. So they'd already been through all of the mayhem of trying to get their services back up and running, and you were the ones that they wanted to scream at. So that was most interesting indeed. So I spent a bit of time there, and I was kind of also doing most of the interfacing between the customer service piece and the engineering piece. And I got to know the engineering piece quite well, so I dropped then into kind of telecoms engineering.
So you've really got your hands dirty and done the job, huh?
Oh yeah. For the majority of my career, you know, I've been technical. My qualifications coming out of college were actually in programming, believe it or not. So I could program in basic Pascal and COBOL, which I'm sure would be hugely useful to me now.
Yeah, that and joined up writing. Can we click the next click, please? Is that Jamie's? This is my favourite, Patrick. This is absolutely the last one. This is my favourite. Out Big Bolger. Is that something you want to talk about on the air, or would you not leave that till later?
Can I say absolutely not?
Can we click and move on, please? Sorry, everybody listening, but my machine is just not going right now. So we've just been talking about Patrick's early life and current life. We'll talk about that in a second. And we're going to ask him what his focuses are and what's his advice for the future. And then we'll ask him if he's got 3 wishes. I know Patrick real well, so I know he's got plenty of personal ambitions. It would be interesting to get one of those from him. In fact, Patrick, I don't know if you know, I got hold of a couple of photographs of you. Did you know that?
Yeah, and most interesting. Now I'm scared, Malcolm.
Let's have a look at the first one. Could be so what on earth are you doing here, Patrick? Patrick standing up. I'm not sure if it's a ballet dancer or what is happening here, Patrick?
Believe it or not, that's about 20 minutes before I got married. So we're standing. The guy on the left is actually my kickboxing instructor, a guy called Peter Foley, who's one of the main men for kickboxing in Ireland, and he was one of my ushers. So about 20 minutes before we got married, we're outside the church, and the photographer is taking some shots, and he said, I want you to take some shots shaking hands with your ushers, which I was doing, and I put my hand out to Peter, and Peter said, nope, round kick. So he stood.
Pretty good at it, weren't you?
Yeah, I was pretty good. I won a few championships and did it for a long, long time till I found out how much it began to hurt. And it's very, very difficult to turn up for work on a Monday morning having had a fight on Sunday with, you know, 2 black eyes and a broken nose. So something
Okay,
had
so
to give.
let me get right. You're killing people at your wedding. Let's have a look at the next slide, please. And who's this maniac?
Yeah, that will be me as well.
You're having trouble getting that bike up. Aren't you supposed to drive bikes upright and not at angles like that? Is that?
You are, but this is not on a public road, I hasten to add. You'll notice the race number on the front of the machine, and it is actually on a racetrack. In fact, I was just doing a track day there, so it was just practicing. So yeah, I'm afraid I like my dangerous hobbies, and I have a series of bikes I still have, and I do some instructing. So I get people to pass their advanced motorcycling test with a crowd called the Institute of Advanced Motorists. Wow. So if they've been driving for a few years, just taking some of the danger out of it, really, and teaching them how to ride safer. Although clearly I'm not doing that here.
You know, Pat, that's a lot what we do in our world, isn't it? Take the danger out of things, make things more efficient, make things better, and reduce risk. And in fact, if we go to the next slide, perhaps you can explain how it works on this Gartner ITOM hype cycle.
Okay, right, yes.
Why don't you tell us all about it? I'll sit back out your way.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I thought this was very interesting because the hype cycle by Gartner, really, so you'll see on the left-hand side of the kind of lower, where you've got all the technology triggers coming in. So you've got things like cloud management platforms now really starting to be a technology trigger for people to look at deploying these technologies. So what happens is you get people excited by this, and expectations go through the roof as to what this will actually deliver. And then actually you reach a peak of inflated expectations, and then, you know, the hype starts to die down a little bit as people start to deploy these things and slip into what they call the trough of disillusionment. And then actually practice takes over. People get a logical kind of sense of what they can deliver with this, and they go up the slope of enlightenment and finally over to the plateau of productivity. And actually, if someone can animate this for me, I thought it was interesting from an ITIL perspective. So if someone can click on that, ITIL V2 is placed here, just on the slope of enlightenment. So you'd think it was dead now because the courses have been removed, but as we'll see, it's still very much alive. So on the slope of enlightenment, we still got a way to go before we're actually getting the most from ITIL V2. If we look at where V3 is, so again, V3 is here just entering the trough of disillusionment, or a little bit down the way of trough of disillusionment. And actually, it'll be hard to see on this slide deck, but that's actually color-coded. So you see the light blue on the right till V2 basically says that it's got kind of 2 to 5 years before it goes from one phase, i.e. out of the slope of enlightenment, into a plateau of productivity. And the ITIL V3 is saying it's got 5 to 10 years in effect before it goes from one segment into the next. So I think there's a lesson there that actually there is a lot of maturing to do with the existing processes. And you know, we've gone from effectively 10 processes to 26 or whatever the latest number happens to be. And really, people are still struggling with the ITIL V2 processes in the vast majority of cases. So that's largely what it's about.
Pat, the V2 processes are the same as V3, you know, incident, problem, change, blah, blah, blah. Where do they fit on this graph, would you say? Would you say they're over in the V2 category, and the rest of V3 is over on the other side, or what?
I would say yes, certainly. The more strategic processes, I think, you know, if we forget about process for a moment and look at the phases of the life cycle, I mean, you know, nearly everyone's doing service operation and to an extent transition to a reasonable degree. I would say there's some people doing service design to a reasonable degree, but I think CSI and service strategy are the ones where people are really suffering. And let's face it, the first edition of the service strategy book didn't necessarily do us any favors in that respect, because it wasn't exactly what I'd call easy reading.
Yeah. Is there such a thing in ITIL?
Well, service transition, service operation, service design are relatively easy to digest, but service strategy, all it is, I believe, now getting a bit of an overhaul with the current refresh.
Yeah, I also think, Pat, I don't know about you, I also think that with cloud computing, something that strategy becomes much, much more important if you're looking at putting important services out onto the cloud. You better make sure the planning is done properly and get it right, otherwise you can get all sorts of trouble.
Actually, before we move to that next slide, look over on the left at cloud management platforms, going up that technology trigger phase of the hype cycle. Yeah, the fact of the matter is people are looking to cloud and looking to, it'll make us more agile. You may be able to outsource particular parts of the function, but I don't think people get you're not outsourcing the responsibility for it. You still have to control it. You still have to be compliant. You still have to reduce risk to the business, and your supplier is not taking that risk on your behalf. They're not taking the risk with your data, et cetera, et cetera. That's your risk still to manage. So you might be able to outsource a function, but you can't outsource the responsibility for maintaining it and managing it on behalf of the business.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Actually, on that sense, actually, if they move to the next slide, this is quite interesting. We did a bit of research here. You'll see down at the bottom there's a hyperlink to the research called ITIL State of the Nation. And basically, one of the things we did is looked at kind of maturity levels. Now, we didn't just ask the question here, are you low, medium, high in terms of maturity? We actually asked some very specific questions more aligned with CMMI. So, are your processes documented? Are they understood? Are they followed? You've got metrics to measure them, etc. What we found is the majority of adopters are really somewhere between completely new to ITIL and medium levels of maturity. So that constitutes about 68%. The other 32% in the very high or reasonably high category, they actually were measured in very different terms to the ones in the other categories, and they were typically measured in terms of business transactions and business outcomes, and the relationship between IT and the business in those cases was far, far greater than the ones at the lower end of the stack, the lower levels of maturity. So that was quite interesting. Then we can move on again to the next level, unless you got a question for me, Malcolm.
No, the only query I had back looking at the slide was just a quick one, and that was, what about fit for purpose? Because you don't necessarily have to go to the highest level to be fit for purpose.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. I mean, if you look at CMMI, somewhere between level 0 and level 5, I mean, you'll typically find fit for purpose, depending on what you're talking about, comes in between level 2 and level 3. So, you've documented, you've got control of it, you're actually managing the process itself. And from about 3 and beyond, then it starts to mature. But you do have to mature those processes. You can't kind of you can't really start off aiming for a level 5 unless you already got your ducks in line, as they say. So I mean, actually, on the next slide. Sorry, Mark.
Sometimes, Pat, we can leave this slide on that's on right now, but sometimes it's better to aim for fit for purpose first and get your processes to that level, and then look at taking them to the next step, rather than having some very advanced and some very poor processes all clashing against each other.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I liken it, to use an analogy, to learning a language. You can't start off with advanced Russian. You've got to learn the basic phrases, how to use the verbs, etc., etc. And once you become conversational, you'll eventually become fluent. But you can't expect to go right there from the off. So that's it.
Yeah, I know that too well. I know that very well.
So actually, just proving the point, if you look at maturity levels here, we asked adopters that those that had considered themselves to have taken on V2, what is it you've implemented? And actually 96% is, no surprise, incident management. Actually, what the other 4% are doing is the thing that I want to know.
That's quite interesting, yeah.
Change management probably driven by compliance and regulatory issues, 82%, and problem management at 64%, which is good. But also, if we want to break firefighting circles, you really need to address that, and it's a bit of a shame that 36% haven't actually recognized that yet, and service level management down as low as 50%. And then you start going at 40%, and actually for the service delivery or the more strategic of the processes, anywhere between kind of mid 30% down to kind of low 20%. So things like financial capacity management, not that many people doing it. And then if you look at V3, on the next slide, that's actually even more evident. So although we haven't got the specific numbers, you can see them on the side, the pattern's exactly the same. So incident in number 1 position, change number 2, number 3 problem management, number 4 service level management, request fulfillment, and perhaps in that case, you could say actually it was probably joined up with change previously. But get over to the right-hand side of that graph and look at things like the financial management, service portfolio, demand management. Those are in really, really low percentages. The items in purple there, that basically shows that people have planned to do these things. So things like portfolio management being the highest one that's planned, but in reality, the ones that have done it are, very, very low indeed.
Have you left some off here deliberately, Pat, or is it just, am I just reading it? I'm looking at the capacity management. Have I missed that somewhere?
Capacity management should be on there. It may not have come out on the graph. No, actually, you're right, Malcolm. It isn't on there. So
because demand management used to be part of that, and I was curious that demand management was so low. It's an important part of planning, I'd have thought.
It is indeed, but if you're having, and again, I get to those points in a moment, I think. Actually, if we can move to the next slide, I think I'm just making some points specifically around this. So what are the big challenges for people doing this? Well, the highest challenge there is resource. We don't have the time, we don't have the people. We're constantly stuck in firefighting mode, and as a result, they can't really adopt the processes and manage them to that extent. But it's a catch-22 situation. If you don't, what's going to happen? Situation will get worse, it won't get better. Cultural resistance, pushback. We've always done it this way, why should we change? And then actually, even if you can get so far, maintaining momentum, that's a big challenge. So taking it to the next level. And then on the middle to right-hand side of the graph, the business understanding of IT's objectives. And I suppose as a result of that, the fact that they won't provide the funds, they see the cost of adoption too much, lack of executive sponsorship, and actually the least challenging is ITIL skills. Those I suppose are readily available or at least attainable. But I group these, if we can just flick on, I group these into two headings. So number one, IT being focused on technology, and number two, lacking the business engagement. And those, I think, are the two main issues that we've got in terms of moving things forward in respect to maturity.
Pat, can I ask you a couple of questions on cultural resistance, because it's something that I bumped into literally just a few days ago. And I find it quite interesting because when we talk about cultural resistance, the temptation is to think about the business has the resistance. In fact, last week I was hitting it very, very much internally rather than the business. It was the rest of IT that had the cultural problem, not the business.
I think I find that more commonly than anything else. The business is quite used to and prepared to accept change in the vast majority of cases. Look at sales and marketing environments. They're really eager and keen to adopt change in the vast majority of cases because they basically see that as a way to improve. And I think IT, I wouldn't say it's wholly resistant to change, but it's wholly resistant to the way that we've always done things. In some cases, I heard a great comment. We had Stephen Mann from Oven speaking at our Hornbill user group a while ago, and he came out with a statement which sounds a bit harsh, but there's a lot of merit to it. If you can't change the people, change the people.
Yeah. No, I understand totally. I mean, it's funny because, the one area where I find most resistance, cultural resistance, is to change management. And the mere suggestion you get when you say request for changes should be put in at the beginning of a change, not near the end of the change. It's almost like revolutionary. It's kind of like Stalin or something walked through the door. It's the most amazing reaction.
But do you not think that to some extent, Malcolm, I think that that's a facet of IT largely being driven to be reactive by the business needing stuff and needing it now. The business doesn't know what it wants, but when it wants it now. That type of approach?
I think it's also comfort zone. I've always done it this way, and it's always worked. Why should I share with you? I mean, IT can be a lot of little fiefdoms in many cases. But I think that the key thing about cultural resistance is that certainly what I've done before, what we did before, is actually let's draw a chart, like a flow chart, of how the business does business. How do we get from one end to the other through business? And then you relate that to IT, and suddenly things drop in place.
Absolutely.
And that's the key, I think, with some of this stuff, is relating it to the business. Like you're saying, lack of business engagement, that is so important.
Yep, no question. But there's a model that supports this. Actually, if we move on through the slides to the next one, we should get. So that, to me, is the nature of the problem. So if you're a technology-focused organization, typically you're focused on the boxes. You know, you're focused on bits and bytes, and you're not necessarily technology-focused IT staff don't necessarily get that the database they're looking after allows someone to, I don't know, pull up customer records, print invoices, or whatever the business outcome is, whatever that's used for. And that changes. This model here is not one I've invented.
Actually, no, we need to go. Can we go back a slide? There we go.
Okay.
That's better.
Yeah, so that's a good example of the challenges that
We'll be there in a minute.
Yeah, the challenges that they face. You know, everything is approached from a technology perspective. Problems are approached with technology solutions. You know, we're not really used to engaging with the business. We don't understand the strategic goals. And actually, even for those organizations, their real barrier is the fact that the business sees them as the guys that actually run the boxes and run the servers, and they see them as not a strategic partner, but just basically as a cost. And as a result, they don't really provide that strategic advice to IT so it could maybe help it achieve its goals. And they set objectives for IT, and those objectives, although it's, I'm sure a lot of people identify it, you know, next year, when we set your budgets, we're going to take a little bit of cost off there, and basically we want you to do a better job, do it faster, and do it cheaper than you did the year before. And that's often the driver for a technology-focused organization. So actually move on to the next slide.
Actually, while we're on this one, Patrick, we can leave this one here. I mean, one of the things I found quite interesting is a changing role, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. Just recently, like you do as well, I was checking in at the airport, and I went up to one of the stations to check in, and a woman came over to me and said, "Hi, I'm from the airline. Do you know how to do this? Do you need any help?" That kind of stuff. And I said, "No, I'm fine. I can do this." So she just hung around for a second, watched that I was competent, and went off to the next person. It occurred to me that actually is the front end of the service desk now.
No question.
But she never. I asked her. I called her back and I said, did you log down our conversation? No. Did you log down what you did with that woman over there? No. What happens then? How do we get that information back to IT so they can do things better? So we've never been asked to give it back to IT.
That's a very good point, Malcolm.
So how does that fit? Can you see what I mean? Because what I'm saying is that woman in that particular case should have logged it down somewhere, and then IT could produce a better system next time.
I think that time is coming. I think that time is coming. You think about the way technology is changing, the rise in apps, for example's sake. How long will it be before she's carrying a smartphone of some description and she's able with 2 or 3 button clicks to actually record the nature of a problem that's occurred maybe at that check-in desk? Without gathering specific details. We've seen it, move on quite considerably over the last little while.
Yep.
If a guy comes to do a repair at an appliance at my house now, he's not using a PC anymore. He's using a little smartphone. And
Exactly.
No longer are we typing in long, complicated information on the forms. It's 4 or 5 button clicks, and that's it. I'm done.
So 2 points in, Pat. We've got the technology, which could be social networking technology. It doesn't have to be something that's written or complex, or an extension of a service desk technology that the company may already have. Certainly an airline would have service desk technology. The second one is the ownership of the data and the people doing it, and particularly the ownership of the data, because if we don't record the data, then we can't do problem management because there's no root causes to identify.
I love the question of data, because who owns the data? There's only one answer to that. It's not IT's, it belongs to the business. IT may be the custodian of the data, but it doesn't own the data. The data belongs to the business, and it's down to the business to actually determine how IT should be maintaining that. It's not the job of IT to actually, it's the job of IT to look after it, yes, but it's a strategic business asset, and it needs to be looked after.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, Pat, because there's going to be a lot more of this, externally supported technology. Where we'll have staff from the business fronting technology rather than using the technology to front the business. So it's going to be interesting.
So no question.
Better get back to your proper slide here, Pat.
Okay, yeah. So what I did, because I know you had I spoke on a couple of seminars with you, Malcolm, when you were doing the ITIL Light stuff, and really I think that's quite a pragmatic workshop for people to go to. But our approach was kind of different to that. We looked at kind of ITIL v3 and thought, damn, that looks like a very, very steep hill to climb for an organization perhaps that's either in chaos or just moving out of chaos and managing the technology and technology focus. But really, what we did was kind of broke down those processes into areas where we could see that you would reduce the cultural resistance to change and you'd have some familiarity with IT staff. So if you just, there will be an animation on this first part, so we just go forward. So there we go. Technology-focused staff, if you implement incidents, reactive problem management, where you're just doing root cause analysis, change, asset knowledge management, fine. People can cope with that. They understand largely what the premise is there. They don't need to understand financial and chargeback at that level, or actually at that level where they try to implement financial and chargeback for services. It will be a really tough ask for them. So if they're a technology-focused organization, they probably exist and manage those processes. If they move up to service focus, you can start introducing some more processes. So things like the service catalog, focused on the user and IT rather than focused on the business. Things like release and deployment, proactive problem management. And again, event management, you could easily argue that belongs in technology focus, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. But those things start to develop, and again, you develop different cultures, different sense of maturity at this level. Moving up to customer focus, you get things like availability and capacity, but not of components of services. Things like supplier management, costing out your services. Then up to business focus, you have got things like demand management and actually being in a position for chargeback for those services to the business. And finally, value focus. So value focus would be the Amazons of this world, where IT's products and services are embedded in what the business actually offers. So you can't really interact with the business without interacting with their products and services. And it's at that level you really need things like service portfolio and service strategy to the full extent described in the books. So that's just really a model, and you have to choose for yourself which ones work for you, but it's a model that we could see made sense. And reduce the cultural resistance and just made it easier to progress. So I'm starting with my basic Russian and moving all the way up to being fluent in focus.
Do these stack up? In other words, to get to service focused, you have to do the technology focused piece.
I think really the biggest leap on this entire thing is between technology and service focus. I don't think, unless you've got people that have done it before, been there, done it before, that you can leap on there straight into service focus. If you've got the right staff, you're building an IT organization from the ground up, you've got plenty of resource, you can hire experienced people, then you possibly could. Starting off with defining your services, getting the business engagement. But most people are not in that situation. They've got technology focused groups. Just as an estimate, Malcolm, we looked at some statistics around this, and the stats that we got reckon that value focus, there's about 3 to 5% of global IT organizations up at that level. There are about 75% of global IT organizations somewhere between technology and service focus. And actually below that, there's one called chaos, and fortunately, there's a very few left there now. So that gives you some idea.
Yeah, actually, as an aside, I see you've used underground subway map style.
Yeah, mind the gap.
Mind the gap. Do you know who invented that?
No, I don't. No.
A guy called Harry Beck, who was worked in the London Underground system, London subway system in the 30s, and in fact he drew the first map in 1933. And actually the second map, the first one he drew in 31 was rejected, and he drew a new one in 33. And for the whole history, he got paid $25 US roughly, drawing the map and doing amendments to it.
Wow!
Money's made out of that map ever since. It's quite incredible. The other thing that's a beauty is that he was actually an engineer, so he did an engineering diagram rather than a road map. They were expecting it would be a map of London with the stations on top of the streets, if you see what I mean. Marked on
yes,
top
of course.
Map.
And of course, if it was, you'd never be able to follow it.
No, exactly. You'd never find it. In fact, anybody who's been to London and has used an ordinary map realises it's really hard to find the stations. So he just drew the only thing he knew, which is a wiring diagram. How incredible is that? Unbelievable.
but it just shows how you can take this layering works really well. Take something at its simplest level. I mean, if you look at things like how you map business services to IT components, you really have to layer it. You can't start and draw your complex map because it would be exactly the same thing. At the lowest level, I need to understand my components. At the highest level, I need to understand my services, and it's just getting the links between those. So, and that's a challenging thing to do.
The other thing that I find interesting about the map itself is if we look at technology focus, I see you put asset and not configuration there.
Yeah.
Was there a reason for that? I'm sure there was.
Well, there is a reason. There is a reason because to me, configuration management, particularly if you're building a CMDB, is more about the link between the IT assets and the business outcomes that they actually service, or the services that the customer uses. And I don't think until you have a concept of services and until you have an understanding of what those services are, you can do true configuration management. Below that, if you're just recording, what's out there and what its attributes are and that type of thing, without the proper relationship scaling all the way up to business services, you're not doing configuration management, to my mind.
Yeah, it is the way to manage services, no doubt about that.
Yeah. I liken it to the best analogy I think I can give for that is it's like taking those big complicated 10,000 piece jigsaws. And it's like turning it upside down on a large table and just saying to a group of people, here's all these 10,000 pieces. There you go, make sense of it, then hiding the box.
Or hiding one piece.
Yeah, hiding the box is even better because you haven't given them an idea what picture you're trying to build. When configuration management is the same. If I got 10,000 CIs, unless I know what picture I'm trying to build with those CIs, and I need to have that picture of the services. I need to understand what the services are first, and now I can start making sense of where my pieces go together to support those services.
Exactly, and that means you can manage by service. For example, if you look at capacity management, say a service is going to expand by 30% for a business reason. With capacity management, I need to know all the components end to end that all have to have 30% more or thereabouts.
Yeah,
as opposed to knowing the capacity just of individual boxes. It's about, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's pointless. I mean, there's no point in looking at, well, it's useful to know the capacity because you are going to have to know that, but to what end? Yeah, to the end that actually I'm supporting the capacity of a service. That's the important piece. Exactly. And it's supported by the capacity of the individual components, not actually driven by them. So,
yeah, I agree.
I think we're getting short on time, Malcolm, but if we move on, one of the things I really did want to focus on, because you were asking me about one of the things I'd recommend, what advice would I give for the near future, and I think we need to get out more is what I'd probably say, and by that what I mean is we really need to start engaging with the business, but also not just trying to respond to every single request that comes into us. I think that's a major problem for a lot of IT organizations. So you've got sales saying, we need you to do this, marketing saying, we need you to do that, your accounts team saying, we need the other, the CIO saying, we need this, and CEO needing something else. So what you tend to find is that IT is pulled in all directions. You've got different business units saying, we need this, and then the characteristics is that you have projects that you perhaps start 2 months ago, which were incredibly important at that time, but they're not as important now. Something else is taking priority. So you get these projects postponed, you get several of them unfinished, and literally, you're using those scarce resources to address stuff that really shouldn't be happening at all. So actually, if we move on, I've got a good depiction of that in the next table, if you like. So there you go, typical organization, several business units, and the enterprise function itself. So overall kind of governance of the business. And what they have is different projects that need to be handled with a different level of priority. So they've all got the priority ones, they've all got the priority twos and priority threes. How do you sort that out? It's not IT's job to sort that out. It really isn't. The business has to take ownership of that. So what I'm talking about here is kind of enterprise governance and direction and advice for IT. So if we move on, there's a different way of looking at that same table. So what we've got here now is the table on the right-hand side. It's really those same projects, but now what we've done is we put this enterprise governance team together. Yeah, you've got limited time, you've got limited people, you've got limited cash, and you need to get the advice from the business to say, what do we do first? What do we do second? And what I'm talking about in terms of that enterprise governance team, you know, we're talking about things like CEOs, CFOs, VPs of some business units, so you can't call an IT meeting and expect every VP to turn up. Perhaps you can rotate their participation. And that becomes really interesting, but what I'm suggesting on the right-hand side is taking that map, should we say, that we've got up at the top, turning on its side, and then saying, actually, this enterprise governance team has decided that the items in green are the ones that we absolutely have to do. That's where we're going to focus. That's where we're going to put our priorities. At that point, you can actually scope those. You can get them nailed in terms of the requirements, what we need to deliver. And the point I make there is requirements are like water. You know, they're only easy to walk on when they're frozen. So the items in yellow, yes, they're still important, but you know, we'll get to them after perhaps some of the other ones have dropped off, the green ones have dropped off, and the items in red, perhaps we don't do them at all, or we outsource them to someone else to do them. But it's only when you get the business to take ownership and provide that direction that really I think you can start to manage with the limited resources you have. So that, to me, is one of the most crucial things that IT should get better at doing in the short term.
So, Pat, would you say that's your advice for the near future, that last slide?
My advice for the near future, I'd put it simpler than that, Malcolm. I'd basically say we need to get out more. I'll give you a very short story. I was speaking one time on a conference with a guy called David Taylor, who he's written a number of books. He's relatively well known here in the UK, but he's written The Naked Leader, The Naked Coach. I'm sure you've heard of David. But he talked about his time at a major insurance company, and he just started. He was there a couple of weeks, I think, and he was in actually talking to the CFO and just basically finding out what this particular CFO wanted. And he said, during the middle of our discussion, he said, I saw one of my staff walk down past the glass partitions in this guy's office, and he said, as she started approaching, he said, I could see the CFO's face beginning to change color, and he went bright red. So by the time she'd actually opened the door and walked into the office, yeah, the CFO was visibly upset, should we say. And then she said the words, David, we need you, the system's down. And of course, financial institution, you know, they're actually suffering every time their IT systems go out. So David disappeared, went downstairs, and basically solved whatever particular fire was alight at that point in time. And he said afterwards he was sitting at his desk thinking about it and thought, wow, what a reaction. So he called up George and said, George, I noticed you changed color before my staff had ever come into the room. You know, what provoked such a reaction? He said, David, we only ever see you guys when things are going horribly wrong. And basically, he said, I thought about that, and I went back to my desk and I sat down. He said, and I didn't spend any money. I didn't invent any new complicated processes. I didn't buy any new technology. He said, what I did is I mapped out the 10 most influential people in this business, and I mapped out my most customer-focused IT staff. He said, and I had them visit with these people on a daily basis and just say to them, is everything okay? You know, what do we need to do for you? And they went from having an abysmal reputation to being award-winning in the space of about 6 months. So all he did was he got people to talk to people. And so that would be...
So just get out a little bit more, huh?
Get out a little bit more. Get into the business, start talking to them, start sitting with them, start understanding what it is they actually want. Look at your metrics. Yeah, are you delivering what they want? Is the stuff you get, is anyone calling you up about your metrics? If they're not, they're probably not reading them.
Okay, Pat, looks like we've got to wind up about now.
Okay. You know what, guys, if I can just, we've got a few questions here, so before we lose anybody, I think there's a couple of good questions.
Yeah.
And,
let's have them.
The first one, actually, Patrick, it's back to your slide, a few slides ago on the mapped focus slide. Right. And this comes from Danny, and he's saying, do you feel that this approach works for those who are pursuing service management via an enterprise cloud, and in brackets on demand, versus a perpetual solution in brackets on site?
Is there a difference? If you're approaching, are you talking about using a service management application? Is that what you think he means, Rick?
I think so. I mean, again, what he's saying here is pursuing service management basically via the cloud on demand versus it being on site or a perpetual solution.
I don't think, to be honest, is any different. It's just a different licensing or a different delivery mechanism. At the end of the day, we come back to kind of forget about the technology for a moment, forget about the way that technology is actually delivered. Regardless of how you do it, regardless of the technology or delivery mechanism you use, you still have to have those disciplines in place. You still have to be able to manage your assets effectively, develop your service catalog in conjunction with the customer, establish your service levels, establish the SLAs and OLAs between groups. So I think the whole thing that SaaS has really exploded over the last little while. And really, SaaS has got very little to do with, it's got more to do with choice. It's got more to do with cost and perceived agility and perhaps perceived reduction in business risk. But it's not, it doesn't really affect your effectiveness as a service management organization in terms of your ability to move between one phase and the next. I really don't think that it makes any difference whatsoever. Okay, great.
Malcolm, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I agree entirely. I think that as SaaS and IaaS and PaaS and so on and so forth are choices of the direction that you want to go as an organization. But I've written a white paper on cloud computing and IT service management, and my conclusion was the fact that what does happen is strategy becomes much, much more important. Planning before you do it becomes much, much more important, because once you hand it over, you have no real control anymore as opposed to in-house. It's a different world.
Let me give you just a classic example of where that comes into play. I was talking to one organization a little while ago. They're looking at changing their service management solution, and they wanted to get away from the SaaS model, mainly because they have to comply with FDA regulations. And having that control outside of their remit just wasn't going to work. The other thing in terms of perceived cost, I think IT organizations looking at things like software as a service, perpetual tools, or whatever, they tend to look at kind of year one or perhaps year two costs. But really look at, does this really truly give me flexibility? Does it remove risk from my environment? What are the costs on an ongoing basis, so over 5 years? Do I want to manage this myself, or do I want someone else to manage it on my behalf? Am I compliant with the regulations I need to meet if I've got someone managing this on my behalf? Those are the questions you need to be asking. I don't think the tool's going to make a massive difference, and most of the vendors now are offering the choice. I think that's the important thing here, that to give customers the choice as to use whatever delivery mechanism works best for them.
Excellent, great. I think Danny responded, thank you, so I think you must have covered it well, so thank you for answering that. There's another question that came in, but actually it came in on the slide that you just started talking about, how business engagement was still, getting more involved with the business was still one of the number one priorities to kind of moving this forward. And we hear that often. So what was being asked was, can you give some prescriptive steps to gain momentum, or some prescriptive guidance to how to do this better? And I think the answer was on that slide, your last slide, which was basically some prescriptive guidance, was the formation of the enterprise governance team. So I don't know if there's anything further you wanted to chat about there in terms of helping people that are stuck with, again, they hear so many times that we've got to get the business more engaged, we've got to be more engaged with the business, and I think a lot of people struggle with that prescriptive guidance to gain that momentum. So anything else you wanted to highlight there?
I think that this is a lot to do with the relationship that you've currently got with the business and how the business views you. Bear in mind, if you are at that technology-focused stage, largely they're going to think of you as a cost in the same way that your facilities group is going to be a cost. Admittedly, you're a vital cost, but you are a cost. So at the other end of the scale, where you're providing that value, you're not a cost, you're an enabler. You innovate to make money for the business. And we've got the old Pareto law here, where basically you've got most IT organizations spending about 80% of their time actually operating, just in operation mode, and 20% innovating. If that, probably these days that balance has gone even further in the direction of operation as costs come down. We don't really we can't afford to innovate as easily as we could do perhaps in better times. But redressing the balance is what that's about. But I would say in more prescriptive terms, if you want to get a better relationship with the business, and I come back to that simple point, get out there. What I mean specifically by that, I've seen some really, really good results where an IT person, just someone off the service desk, for example's sake, would go out to a particular business unit for a day or 2 days or whatever it takes, or for half a day. And basically they spend the time with them, talking to the staff, sitting down, understanding the function, understanding what that function does, how it does it, the problems they're likely to face, specifically with IT. And then they come back and they present to the service desk and say, this is what they're doing. Here are ways that we can make things easier for them. Here are things that we could suggest. Once you've got that culture going within the organization of participation and engagement, then you'll find things start to change fairly rapidly.
Excellent. I would imagine that that's also a recipe for saving the internal team from potential outsourcing if you have those kinds of relationships.
No question, no question. Because you stop being a cost then. You're actually the people that they engage with. You've got a relationship with them. You're not just a cost center. You actually have a relationship, and you're seen to be doing things to deliver more value. And again, that's another key thing, just touching on that. I don't know, maybe I'm answering a question, Rick, that's being asked or not, but we're always talking about IT demonstrating business value. And that's a really difficult one, because I don't know what Malcolm's thoughts are, but I think a lot of the things that IT do, there's value in them, no question. So increasing customer loyalty, for example's sake, but it's not a tangible value as such. It's very hard to put a dollar amount on that. Whereas basically when you're engaging with business units and doing stuff that basically enables them to do their job a little bit easier, faster, cheaper, whatever that may be, you start to demonstrate that value more visibly. I'll give you a good example where, for example's sake, IT people, social media we talked about. We talked about its prevalence and how important it's becoming over how IT people are using it quite a lot. We could actually own that. We could take social media, quite easily build up some monitoring for corporate mentions. So if someone mentions Thought Rock, if someone mentions Hornbill, then basically our marketing team wants to know, how about owning that? How about taking that on and saying, actually, we'll do the monitoring for that, and in the event the stuff gets logged, we'll use a service desk tool, we'll log a ticket, we'll inform marketing. There's business value straight away. You're now actually starting to demonstrate stuff that's very, very visible, and it would be so easy for IT to own that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, it's a great point, because we actually, the BWise group have aptly implemented that. So our service desk is completely integrated with the sales function, the marketing function, and it absolutely works beautifully. Those are natural skills that should be integrated in that play. And anyway, a great point. Malcolm, you had something to say there?
Yeah, I think we have to also look at the way business is doing business with IT nowadays. For example, I mentioned the woman that said to me, "Did I need help checking in, at the terminal?" And basically, if you just think about that, I can book a flight online, I can check in online. If I've got to carry on, I just go straight through security. I've already booked my car the other end online. I can just go up, the car's waiting for me, or I pick one from a line of cars, I get in the car and go away. So empowering the customer to do their own work, if you like. Because I'm ordering the plane, I'm not making an 800 number call to get someone to book a flight for me and then wait for the tickets to arrive in the post. One of the things we ought to be looking at doing, this technology has been around for ages, is to actually empower the customer to do a lot more of their own work. For example, raise their own incidents, raise their own changes, check the status of their changes, their problems, their incidents, be able to see their assets using the service configuration management that Pat mentioned earlier.
I can give you a real-life example, Malcolm, of something along those lines, and the stats are really awesome. There's a customer of ours, a company called Knight Frank. They're a real estate company, and basically they had a business case to replace their service desk, and they needed to get a shift of 25% of their incidents logged by a self-service, incidents and service requests. That was the business case. The way that they did what is the most interesting thing. They actually had this kind of staged approach where they implement the self-service. They then started to encourage people, saying, oh, by the way, when you call the service desk, did you know you could log it in this manner? And then they noticed a bit of a shift, but not a lot of a shift, and they got slightly more forceful, and they said, is there any reason, after a period of time, is there any reason why you haven't logged it in this manner? And they got more of a shift towards incidents and service requests coming via self-service. And basically, they pushed it all the way, and the people that weren't logging incident via self-service, they took it upon themselves to go around and sit down with them and educate them as to how they could do it. Now, that may sound like a really tough, resource-hungry thing to do, but over a period of 1 year, here's some of the stats, right? They now, as of, I think, September of last year, 73% of all incidents and service requests handled on the service desk now come via self-service. They've had a 50% reduction in the number of calls through callbacks, etc., because the customer automatically goes to this area now. They had contract staff they just didn't need to renew as a result of doing this, and 97% of all incidents are logged, responded to, and the customer is told who's handling it and what they're doing within 5 minutes that they're being logged. I kid you not. Those are the stats. So if you need any evidence that this stuff works, there's a shining example.
That's excellent.
Yeah, remote empowerment, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, no question.
So let's. I think we're going to need to wrap up. I want to thank you both gentlemen for that was fantastic. Great start to the whole series of Malcolm and Friends, and good conversation. I do know that through feedback from our Thought Rock members, people do appreciate the banter and the conversation versus the one-way presentation, because I think it does give different perspectives and allows them to hear people debate topics and go back and forth. So we're looking forward to doing more of this, and everyone please stay tuned for additional topics that are coming up. I do have the contact information here. So for both Patrick and Malcolm, please feel free to obviously contact them directly and ask any questions. You can also submit information to us at info.thoughtrock.com. But here's Patrick's information to Hornbill, so please, again, feel free to get out there and talk to the Chief Evangelist with any of the issues that we've discussed today or anything with respect to IT service management. Hornbill's got a fantastic brand in the industry, and they're out there, and they're ready to help. Malcolm's book as well is available in the Thought Rock bookstore. It's also available and a number of different on Malcolm's site as well. But if you are a Thought Rock member, there's some discounts available, so check that out. It's a fantastic book, and I know that Malcolm, I believe there'll be some more educational snippets as well as some sessions like this related to some of the topics in that book, so we look forward to that going forward as well.